Even though America was not a battlefield during World War II, an entire country was still affected by daily living. Everywhere you turned, there was propaganda in favor of the war, promoting the people to stay calm and cooperative.
Mom, we're going to start over because we have to have it in. Are we on? Okay.
Can we do it tonight?
Today is October 11th, 2015, and last May 21st, in Claire's freshman year, she was to write an interview project, an interview grandma on the childhood in the 40s. And here we are at grandma's. Claire got an A+, good job. But she didn't interview grandma, and she's done research to write this paper. So now I want to find out how close accuracy was Claire in her writing of this paper, because grandma's going to read it now, of her childhood in the 40s.
Interview project, childhood in the 40s. Research summary. Before I interviewed my grandmother about her experiences in high school, I researched a lot about the topic. I think that I was better prepared about the topic of high school in the 40s and being a teenager in general because I had read so many other articles about it. Being a teenager in the 40s was extremely difficult than what it is to be a teenager now in the 21st century. One of the reasons is that at that time, around 1945, World War II was coming to an end. Even though America was not a battlefield during the World War II, the entire country was still affected in daily living. Everywhere you turned, there was propaganda in favor of the war, promoting the people to stay calm and cooperative. Many and most families all over America had to ration all of their meals for a month. Families would register to receive their rations of cheese, fish, milk, meat, and other canned goods. They would pay with a series of blue points for canned, bottled, or dried food, and red points for the meat, fish, and dairy. Due to the function and uncertainty of the war, the prices of the goods changed constantly. Families never took their meals for granted. But it was not only food that was being rationed. An online article from the U.S. History states that in addition to food, rationing also encompassed clothes, shoes, coffee, gasoline, tires, and fuel oil. With each coupon book came specifications and deadlines. Rationing locations were posted in public view. There was strict rationing in America, and some people did not like it. Some groups of people secretly met and traded for things that had become luxuries as far as chocolate, sugarcane, liquor. They called it the black market. Aside from the few rioters involved in the black market, most of the civilians did not complain about rationing because they knew that their men and women in uniform were all making real sacrifices. Many propaganda posters hung in the towns and cities that read, "Do with less so they'll have more," and rationing means a fair share for all. To save and use less food, so more resources could go to the American troops. But food was not the only thing that they were trying to preserve for the troops. They also collected tin, aluminum, and cans to melt the metal down to use for ammunition and tanks. It was considered a waste of gasoline to drive a car by yourself, so they always insisted on carpooling and joining car-sharing jobs. As for the social lives of teens in the early 40s, they would often listen to the late tunes on the radio, such as Jimmy Dorsey, who may not sound familiar to my generation, but many of his songs charted the top 10 of the billboards in the 40s. Both indoors and car drive-in movies theaters were very popular among the youth. Films such as The One Wild One, The Teenage Rebel, hit the big screen and were a huge success. Entertainment was clearly much difficult back then than it is today. These pages are really thick.
Yeah.
Number 2, interview highlights. For this interview project, I chose to interview my grandmother on my mother's side, Mary Saleweski. She spelled that wrong. My mother is 87 years old and she lives in a small town of Amory, Wisconsin. She has lived in Wisconsin her whole life but has traveled all over Europe. She likes to swim, bake beautiful homemade quilts, and for her countless of grandchildren. She has 9 children with in the span of 16 years, with her from her 30s and 40s, one including my mother. My grandmother was born on September 20th in 1929. Actually, I was very curious on how difficult her life was as a teenager compared to my life today in the 21st century. My grandma went to a small high school in Wisconsin. She was in high school from 42 to the graduating class of 46. Wrong one.
Yeah.
That means...
Well, make corrections when you see them.
It's 45. Which means that she was in high school around the same time that World War II was coming to an end in September of 45. Even though Wisconsin was not a battlefield during the war, she was still heavily affected by it in her childhood. I asked my grandmother if she experienced any unusual things as a teenager growing up, and that she told me was very interesting. I had already done a lot of research about the subject of World War II and its effects on America, but it is very interesting to get a personal view, point of view from a civilian opposed to a history textbook. My grandmother explained to me that how they had food rations. She said that some of her friends and families had to be on a waiting list to get their family car. They had to sparingly use things that were suddenly considered luxuries that before the war she had said that had taken for granted. Perhaps most all of sugar. My grandmother explained how much she had missed the sweet taste of sugar in her daily foods. A family of 4 only received 2 pounds of sugar for an entire month, so they learned to ration it in their coffee, tea, and pastries. My grandmother's family wanted to help America's troops as much as any other family, so recommended by the government, they started to tend to their own home garden and started to can their foods. Aside from the rationing and government requirements, my grandmother was just a normal teenager. For fun, she would read teen magazines, which were all the rage at the time, such as 17 magazine, which is still popular today. The other girls her age were going crazy over singers such as Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley. When I asked my grandmother what a normal day looked like for her as a teenager, she said that she would wake up early to tend to the animals on the farm, then walk to her high school. After school, she had a job as a waitress at a local diner in town. Boy, you got me working pretty hard here. Then she had for 3 years until she graduated. A fond memory that she had from her childhood was that every night after school and after her parents come home from work, the entire family would sit down for dinner. They would catch up and share what they did that day. In spite of some of the terrible things that were going on around her, she still remained happy and did everything she could do to help her loving family. How did the primary interview help your project? Before the annual interview, I compiled about 10 questions for a quick primary interview to find out more of my grandmother's backstory and information from her point of view. Over the phone, I asked her which high school she went to, how old she was, how old she is now, and other important factors that I needed to know before I asked more in-depth questions in the main interview. The primary interview helped me figure out which direction I was going to take with the interview and which parts were more interesting that I would ask about. Biography, being a teenager in the 40s, growing up.
Oh, those are her
yeah,
biography
yeah,
references.
yeah.
So you were supposed
That's
to
it.
read it and then I didn't have a job after school.
No, I did
what
not.
was your experience growing up? You didn't have, that's because she was the oldest and you took care of the
I took care of everybody at home,
siblings.
made the meals at home.
Here we
My
go.
mother went downtown.
Do you remember the rationing coupons?
I just barely remember the rationing coupons, and I remember Sears Roebuck, and they would send out catalogs, and part of their catalog were like shoes that was made out of maybe some hard rope or something. They didn't have any leather in them and stuff that we could send for without ration stamps.
Oh, very
Yeah.
interesting.
Mhm.
What about collecting cans and tin and everything like that? Do you remember your parents saving that stuff and delivering it?
Well, I remember we went to the creamery and bought cream and made our own butter.
hmm
And
Do you remember any of the guys coming back wounded? in town? Anybody's uncle? Nobody that you
Nobody
know?
around our town did.
No, nobody. No. What about did your dad talk about the war? Did he sit and read the paper and talk about the war and mention anything with your
I
mom?
don't think I
No?
ever even thought about it.
Yeah.
And Orwell was in the war.
Who was?
Orville was
Orwell
in
submarines.
Orville was in the
His brother.
tuna submarine out in the Pacific,
Hmm.
and the other boys. Ken was the only one that was in the Air Force and left the country. The other two boys were in the service, but I think they stayed right in. They had jobs in the States here.
So these were. Wait a minute. Uncle Orville?
Uncle Orville, that was their dad's brother, Niles' brother,
Oh, okay.
oldest brother
Did he ever talk about where he was or anything? No.
in the
No.
Pacific. He was in the Pacific.
Yeah.
Orville was.
Yeah.
And
So, Claire, who's now been renamed Pinocchio over here,
oh, okay.
did quite a job of putting it together.
Yes, she did.
And even though she got a few things,
She
Elvis
read?
Presley wasn't even on the
Well,
scene yet.
no, and Frank Sinatra, I can remember him because they had the Lucky Strike Hour on the radio,
Uh-huh.
and of course it was before television.
Sure.
And on the radio they had they'd start on number 10, and then go up to number 1, and Elvis and Frank Sinatra always sang the number 1, and the women would scream and holler and yell and just carry on. You could hardly hear him singing, but he was crooning away to beat the band.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was all in his glory back in 45 and 44.
Did you go to the prom?
Yep,
Who did you go with?
Niles,
Oh, really?
Yep.
Both times.
both times.
So he was your boyfriend all through high school.
Yep.
Wow.
When did you move? How old were you when you came to Amory from
How
Madison?
old was that? Was back in I was in 3rd grade, and that was back like in 36.
Okay.
I was born in 27. So 36, 7 and 36, that means 9. Yeah, so I was about
Now-
9 years old.
When's the first time you met Niles? Was he a kid in grade school that you knew, or did
No, because he went to grade school out here.
Oh,
He didn't come to high school. He didn't come to high school until, school in Amory until high school.
do you remember the first time you saw him? Took an interest in him. How did you have a first
Oh,
date?
He must have been playing football, I suppose.
And you were watching him
I
play
was
football.
watching, yeah.
And then who asked who out? Of course, a girl would never ask a guy out back then, or did you?
Not back then.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
say
yeah.
not. No.
But how did he notice you?
I don't remember.
Okay, so what? So you had a date. Do you remember your early dates? What did you do? Did he didn't drive?
Yes, we had a car. We had a car. His dad's car.
Oh, so he drove his dad's car, and where would you go?
Yep.
Where would you go?
Richardson's to dance.
Richardson's dance.
Richardson's to dance. Yep.
Okay, so you went parking, of course, always, or sometimes, right? Sometimes you made out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yep. When did you know you were going to marry him?
I think when I was a senior in high school.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. What did he ask you?
He gave me an engagement ring at that Christmas.
That Christmas before you guys graduated.
Yeah. Before I graduated. He had already graduated.
Oh, he had already graduated.
He had already graduated.
Was
yeah.
he was out here working on this farm? Yeah. Oh, so he's older than you a year.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
He was born. I was born in 27, and I think he was born in 24.
Where did he give you that ring? Was it in front of people? Or was
I
it
think it was in the car.
in the car? Yeah, yeah. He gave you the ring, and you said yes right away?
Yeah, I think I did.
Yeah.
I took the ring. I didn't show it to anybody.
Then did you go home and tell everybody?
Nope.
No. Okay, so
after I graduated.
because you were worried you were too young, right? Yeah. So then after you're engaged for how long before you actually planned a wedding?
We were married in October of the following year.
Oh.
I graduated in the spring of 45, and we were married in 45.
Were you pregnant
in
yet?
October.
Were you pregnant yet?
No.
No. So how long after you were married were you pregnant?
Well, Beth Ann was born in 48.
So you had a few years of
Yeah.
just you two together,
Yep.
which is always good for a marriage, you know.
Yeah.
Yep. And so you were out here,
Yep.
and how did? But wait a minute, that was his parents' place, wasn't it?
Yep. Yep.
So where were they?
They moved to town.
Oh, when you moved in?
When we moved in, they moved to town.
Oh, okay. And they bought a little house?
Yep. Down by the river.
Okay. I see. And of course, the pregnancy back then was, it just happens. You don't plan it, that's for sure, but it happens, you know, right? No birth control back then. Yeah.
Came along. All
Yep.
of a sudden, we were going into, I think we were going into town or something, and Mother and Dad and Grandma were in the car with us, and he said something about, well, Mary couldn't keep her breakfast down this morning.
Oh, that was a nice way of introducing it, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so where'd you get married?
In St. Joe's.
That's a church in town?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, on a Saturday?
Yep.
October
27th.
27th. Was it a nice day?
Yes, it was.
Where'd you
Around
go?
October.
Where'd you go?
Hopped a train to Chicago.
Hopped
Or
the train.
Milwaukee. We got on the train, and he had tickets, and we went to Milwaukee.
Okay, so you went down to the cities to catch a train.
Evidently.
Yeah.
Can't remember.
Yeah.
Must have.
And you stayed in
And I think
Milwaukee.
we stopped at every damn town along the way.
That it does. It does.
Oh
It stops
my
at
God,
Thorpe,
I
La
tell
Crosse,
you,
everything.
I
Yep.
thought I would die.
Yep. So you stayed
Must have been
downtown.
on a milk train. Because
Yeah.
Delivery.
Back then, I think that was a milk train.
So you stayed in Milwaukee and
I think we were gone a week.
gone a week, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. And stayed at a
Because
hotel.
We didn't have a car.
At a hotel down there.
Yep.
Yeah. Did you go and see any things, or you just hang
I can't
out and be
remember.
with each other?
I can't remember.
Yeah.
I can remember more of when I got on a plane, when he went up to Thule, Alaska.
Greenland. Yeah.
He went up to Thule,
Hmm.
and that was before Richard was born. Richard? He left that summer, and we were on the farm, and we had Rick Ream come over and do the chores, and Niles had studied, and he went up to Thule. They hired him to come up to Thule to make blacktop for the airstrip that
Yes.
they were building up there.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
SAC base up there. They flew
And-
B-52s. Yep.
And so he got the job up there to Thule,
Hmm.
and
Now, how did he? Who told him about that job?
oh, I don't know.
And how would he know how to do blacktop?
He just got a bunch of books and read up on it.
Oh, really? He went
Yeah.
up there. And how long was that?
The summer months.
Oh, I bet you
Summer,
missed.
and he came back probably. He went up probably in May, and then in that fall when he came home, probably in October. I flew the first time I'd ever been on an airplane, scareder than anything. I went out to New York, and then from one airport, I forget now what was the name of the airport.
You had to go from Kennedy probably to.
And it wasn't Kennedy at that time.
Yeah, it was something else. Yep.
It was
Yep.
something else. To the other airport, because then I flew up to Massachusetts, where Ken and Shirley were stationed at an Air Force base up
Mhm.
there, and because that's where he flew into from Greenland,
Hmm.
and so then he come back from Greenland, and then we went back to. We stayed a while with Ken and Shirley, probably more than a couple of days. And then we came back to New York, stayed a couple of days in New York, and then came on home.
So you actually went to Greenland?
No,
No, you waited for him to come back. You met
He
him.
flew from Greenland down to Massachusetts.
So he was making really good money up there because
Oh, yeah.
plane tickets back then were really expensive.
Yeah.
They were only for the wealthy people. He must have sent some money back, huh? Or he bought the ticket.
I don't remember
Yeah.
how I got the tickets.
Yeah, wow, that's something.
According to Claire's notes, September 1945, the fall, is when the World War II ended.
Oh,
The fall you got married.
Yeah, 45, huh? Okay, well, that's the story of growing up. And it's for posterity. Someday Claire's children will watch this and see what a Pinocchio
Yeah.
her mother was.